My name is Autumn Wilson, 32, and I own Harvest Table, one of Boston's most successful farm-to-table restaurants. Life wasn't always this good. From struggling chef to restaurant owner, I've come a long way, especially considering my complicated relationship with my mother Claire. When she invited everyone in our family to Thanksgiving except me, I was devastated. Little did she know, she had just booked her fancy holiday dinner at my restaurant. Before I tell you how my mother learned a valuable lesson about family, let me know where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy stories about family drama and sweet revenge. I grew up in a seemingly picture-perfect middle-class suburb in Connecticut. Our colonial-style house with its white picket fence and meticulously maintained garden was the physical manifestation of my mother Claire's need for perfection. Everything had to be just so, including her children. My mother was a force of nature. She ran our household with military precision, planning every detail from weekly menus to our extracurricular activities. Dad, Robert, was kind but passive. He'd quietly wink at me when Mom went on one of her perfectionist tirades, but he never stood up to her. "Your mother just wants what's best," he'd say, shrugging helplessly. In hindsight, I understand he was picking his battles, but as a child, I just felt undefended. I have two siblings who handled Mom's controlling nature differently than I did. My older brother James became the golden child. He checked all of Claire's boxes: business school, corporate job, marriage to a girl from a good family, and a colonial house eerily similar to our childhood home. He learned to play the game perfectly. My younger sister Natalie became the people pleaser. She'd change her opinions, interests, even her appearance based on Mom's subtle, and not so subtle, criticisms. She was constantly seeking approval, constantly monitoring Mom's expressions for signs of disappointment. And then there was me, the black sheep. From an early age, I questioned things. Why did we need to have dinner at exactly 6:30 every night? Why couldn't I wear mismatched socks if I wanted to? Each question seemed to personally offend my mother, as if my desire for autonomy was a direct attack on her authority. The real battleground became apparent when I discovered my passion for cooking at age 12. I still remember the first time I made a meal for the family, a simple pasta dish I'd learned from a library cookbook. Dad and my siblings praised it, but Mom picked at it suspiciously before declaring it too garlicky and not worth the mess in her kitchen. Despite her discouragement, cooking became my refuge. In the kitchen, I found freedom. Recipes were guidelines, not rules. I could experiment, create something uniquely mine. By high school, I was winning local cooking competitions, but Mom dismissed them as hobby achievements. "Cooking is a service job, not a career," she'd say dismissively. "You're too smart to waste your potential in some greasy kitchen." Dad would sneak into my room after these comments, sitting on the edge of my bed to tell me stories about his grandmother who had been a chef at a fancy hotel in the 1940s. "She was an artist," he'd say with a wistful smile. "Just like you, Autumn." These quiet moments of support kept me going. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I'd been accepted to both Johnson and Wales Culinary School and the business program at my mom's alma mater. For me, there was no question which path I'd choose, but Mom had already mentally enrolled me in business school. When I announced my decision at dinner, Mom's face turned to stone. "No daughter of mine is going to spend her life as a cook," she said, spitting out the word cook like it was profanity. "It's chef, Mom. And it's what I want." "What you want?" She laughed coldly. "What you want is to throw away your potential. What you want is to disappoint this family." Dad tried to intervene. "Claire, if this is her passion." "Stay out of this, Robert," she snapped. Then she turned back to me with an ultimatum: "If you choose that cooking school, don't expect any support from me. Financially or otherwise." The table fell silent. James stared at his plate. Natalie looked like she might cry. Dad's face showed conflict. He wanted to support me but couldn't bring himself to openly defy Mom. I looked around at my family, feeling suddenly like a stranger among them. "Then I guess I'll do it without your support," I said quietly, placing my napkin on the table and walking away. True to her word, Mom didn't contribute a penny to my education. She also began a pattern that would continue for years, prioritizing my siblings while excluding me. When James got his first corporate promotion, she threw an elaborate party. When Natalie graduated college, there was a huge family celebration. My culinary school graduation? I received a terse text message, "Congratulations. Hope it works out for you." The pattern was set, and over the years, it only became more entrenched. Family photos no longer included me. Holiday invitations became sporadic. I was becoming a ghost in my own family. With the door to my family home practically closed behind me, I threw myself into building my own life. Culinary school was brutal, 18-hour days divided between classes and the 3 part-time jobs I juggled to pay tuition and rent. My tiny apartment had a leaky ceiling and noisy neighbors, but it was mine, and for the first time I felt free to be myself. In my second year, I caught the attention of Chef Marcus Bailey, a notoriously demanding instructor who rarely praised anyone. After watching me recreate a complex sauce without a recipe, he pulled me aside. "You have something special, Wilson," he said gruffly. "Raw talent isn't enough in this business, but you have that spark, that intuition. Don't waste it." Coming from Chef Bailey, this was equivalent to a standing ovation. He became my mentor, pushing me harder than other students, expecting perfection but also teaching me the nuances of flavor and presentation that can't be learned from books. After graduation, Chef Bailey helped me land an entry-level position at Lumiere, one of Boston's finest French restaurants. I started as a commis, the lowest rank in the kitchen hierarchy. The hours were punishing, the pay barely covered my rent, and the head chef was a tyrannical perfectionist who made my mother seem reasonable by comparison. But I persevered, gradually working my way up through the stations: garde manger, poissonnier, saucier. Each promotion came with new challenges and marginally better pay, but the real reward was the knowledge I was gaining and the respect I was slowly earning from my peers. For years into my career, just as I was being considered for sous chef at a new upscale bistro, I received a call from Natalie that changed everything. "Dad had a heart attack," she said, her voice breaking. "You need to come home now." I took the first train to Connecticut, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. At the hospital, I found Mom maintaining her perfect facade, directing visitors, and speaking with doctors as if organizing a dinner party. James was handling paperwork, playing the responsible eldest child. Natalie was emotional support, getting coffee and offering hugs to everyone. And there I was, the prodigal daughter, unsure of my role in this family crisis. Dad recovered, thankfully, but seeing him in that hospital bed, vulnerable, mortal, shook me to my core. During his recovery, I stayed for 2 weeks, trying to reconnect with my family. Mom acknowledged my presence but remained distant, making comments like, "I suppose cooking has taught you some useful skills for preparing Dad's new heart-healthy meals." Even in this vulnerable family moment, she couldn't help but diminish my career. The day before I left to return to Boston, I overheard her talking to a neighbor in the kitchen. "James has been such a rock through all this, taking time from his important job. And Natalie is an angel, so attentive. It's a blessing to have such devoted children." No mention of my 2-week stay, the meals I'd prepared, the nights I'd spent at Dad's bedside so Mom could sleep. It was as if I didn't exist in her narrative of our family. I returned to Boston more determined than ever to succeed on my own terms. If I couldn't earn my mother's approval, I'd build a life so fulfilling I wouldn't need it. A year later, I met Samantha Green at a food industry networking event. She was a successful business consultant with a passion for innovative restaurants and was looking to invest in promising culinary talent. After tasting my signature dish, a modern take on traditional New England fare, she approached me with a proposition. "You have a unique vision," she said. "Have you ever thought about opening your own place?" The idea seemed impossible. I had skill and creativity but no business experience or capital. Yet Samantha saw potential where others might have seen risk. Farm to table isn't just a trend, I explained to her over coffee the next day. It's a return to cooking's roots, seasonal, local, sustainable. Boston has fine dining and casual eateries, but there's a gap in the market for accessible, high-quality food with transparent sourcing. Samantha listened intently, asking pointed questions about menu concepts, supplier relationships, and target demographics. By the end of our third meeting, she was convinced. I'll provide the startup capital and business guidance if you bring the culinary expertise and creative direction, she proposed. 50-50 partnership. And just like that, Harvest Table was conceived. The timing couldn't have been worse. We signed the lease on our location just as the economy took a downturn. The first year was a constant struggle against bankruptcy. I worked 18-hour days, serving as executive chef, manager, bookkeeper, and sometimes even dishwasher when staff called in sick. There were nights I slept on a cot in the office because I was too exhausted to go home. My personal life became non-existent, dating was impossible, friendships neglected. My entire existence revolved around making Harvest Table succeed. Slowly, painfully, things began to turn around. Our farm-to-table concept started gaining traction as food consciousness grew in popularity. Local farmers became not just suppliers but partners in our mission. Regular customers began to develop, drawn by our constantly evolving seasonal menu and commitment to sustainability. The breakthrough came when Diane Mitchell, Boston's most influential food critic, visited unannounced. Her review, titled Harvest Revolution, praised our unpretentious sophistication and profound respect for ingredients. Reservations doubled overnight, then tripled the following month. 3 years after opening, we expanded to a second location. 5 years in, Harvest Table was being mentioned among Boston's elite restaurants. I was invited to participate in food festivals, charity events, and even a popular cooking competition show. The struggling chef had become a successful restaurateur. Through it all, my contact with family remained sporadic and strained. I'd call Dad weekly, but our conversations were superficial, careful to avoid any topics that might lead to discussion of Mom. I exchanged occasional texts with Natalie and even more occasional emails with James. I sent birthday and Christmas gifts that received brief acknowledgments. Mom and I spoke rarely, usually when I happened to call when she picked up Dad's phone. These conversations were painfully polite, as if we were distant acquaintances rather than mother and daughter. She never asked about the restaurant, and I never volunteered information about my success. It was easier that way, her dismissal couldn't hurt what she didn't know about. As for family gatherings, I was included intermittently, seemingly as an afterthought. Sometimes an invitation would come, sometimes not. I attended when invited, endured the awkward interactions, and left feeling like an outsider looking in on a family that wasn't quite mine anymore. Despite professional success, this family wound remained unhealed, a dull ache I'd learned to live with but could never quite forget. It was early November when my phone lit up with Natalie's name, a rare enough occurrence to make me answer immediately. "Natalie? Everything okay?" I asked, mentally preparing for bad news about Dad's health. "Everything's fine. Just calling to catch up," she said with forced cheerfulness. "How's the restaurant?" We chatted for a few minutes about surface-level topics, her job in marketing, my vague business as good responses about Harvest Table. Then she mentioned Thanksgiving almost casually. "So for the family gathering at Mom's house, James is bringing his famous apple pie, and I'm on green bean casserole duty as usual. Mom said she's trying some new turkey recipe." My stomach nodded. I hadn't received any invitation to Thanksgiving dinner. I considered staying silent, pretending I knew all about these plans, but something in me refused to play along this time. "When was this decided?" I interrupted. "I haven't heard anything about Thanksgiving plans." The pause on the other end of the line was excruciating. "Oh." Natalie's voice shrunk. "I thought Mom called you." "She's been planning it for weeks." "No," I said flatly. "No call, no text, no email. Nothing." "I'm sure it was just an oversight," Natalie stammered. You know how scattered she gets around holidays. But we both knew better. Claire Wilson didn't get scattered. She planned everything meticulously. An invitation wasn't forgotten, it was deliberately not extended. It's fine, I lied. I have plans anyway. The restaurant is always busy on Thanksgiving. This, at least, was true. We offered a special holiday menu that consistently sold out. After some awkward small talk, we ended the call. I sat at my desk, staring at the wall, trying to process this latest exclusion. It shouldn't have hurt after all these years, but it did, a fresh cut over an old scar. Later that evening, my brother James called. Another rarity that signaled Natalie had told him about our conversation. "Hey, Autumn," he said, his corporate voice in full effect. "Just checking in." Natalie mentioned there might have been some confusion about Thanksgiving. "No confusion," I replied. "I wasn't invited." "Pretty straightforward." James sighed. "Look, you know how Mom is. She probably assumed you'd be too busy with your restaurant thing." "You're always working." "My restaurant thing," I repeated. "You mean my successful business that I built from nothing?" "That thing?" "That's not what I meant," he backpedaled. Look, do you want me to talk to Mom? Get you an invitation?" The thought of receiving a pity invitation orchestrated by my brother made me feel physically ill. "Don't bother," I said. "I actually am busy that day. Enjoy your family dinner." After hanging up, I allowed myself something I rarely indulged in, a good, hard cry. Years of minimizing my hurt over Mom's behavior came crashing down. I called my best friend Zoe, who came over with wine and righteous indignation on my behalf. "This is emotional abuse, Autumn," she fumed, pacing my living room. "You need to cut them off completely or confront your mother once and for all." "What would be the point?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "She'll never change." "Then make her face consequences." Zoe insisted. "Show up anyway. Bring a date. Make a scene." I laughed weakly. "That's not really my style." We stayed up late, Zoe suggesting increasingly outlandish revenge scenarios that I'd never actually implement, but that made me feel marginally better. By the time she left, I'd resolved to spend Thanksgiving focusing on my restaurant family, the staff who had become my chosen family over the years. The next morning, I arrived at Harvest Table early to review the holiday booking schedule with my assistant manager, Mike. As he scrolled through the reservations on our system, a name jumped out at me. "Wait," I said, pointing at the screen. "Go back. That reservation for 6 under Wilson." Mike clicked back. "Wilson party of 6, 4 p.m. Private dining room requested. Special occasion noted as family Thanksgiving. Want me to assign Diego as their server? He's great with the holiday crowd." I stared at the reservation, a storm of emotion swirling inside me. Wilson. Family Thanksgiving. Private dining room. There was no mistaking it, my mother had booked my restaurant for their Thanksgiving dinner without having any idea I owned it. Harvest Table had been open for years, had been featured in local and even some national press. But my mother, in her determined ignorance of my career, had never connected the dots. She'd probably heard about it from one of her social circle, a trendy place for a holiday meal, and made the reservation without once considering that it might be my restaurant thing. The irony was almost too perfect. Excluded from Thanksgiving dinner, I would now be hosting it, without my family's knowledge. "Autumn?" Mike prompted, concerned by my prolonged silence. "Should I make a note for special attention since they share your last name? Relatives of yours?" I took a deep breath, making a split-second decision that would set in motion everything that followed. "Yes," I said slowly. "They're relatives. But don't mention that I own the place or that we're related. In fact, don't mention me at all." Mike looked confused but nodded. "Okay, boss. Any particular reason?" I managed a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Let's just say I want to give them an authentic harvest table experience. No special treatment. As Mike walked away, I stood frozen, contemplating what I'd just set in motion. The mature thing would be to call my mother, reveal the coincidence, and clear the air before Thanksgiving. But after years of dismissal and exclusion, a different part of me, a part one wasn't entirely proud of but couldn't ignore, wanted to see her face when she realized whose restaurant she'd be sitting in on Thanksgiving Day. The week leading up to Thanksgiving was a whirlwind of preparation. Harvest Table was fully booked, with our special holiday menu drawing both regular customers and first-time diners looking for an alternative to home cooking. Under normal circumstances, I would have been fully focused on ensuring every detail was perfect. But these weren't normal circumstances. My family, the family that had excluded me, would be dining in my restaurant, unaware that the establishment they'd chosen was mine. The private dining room they'd reserved had been designed by me, the menu crafted from my recipes, the very tables hand-selected from a local woodworker I'd befriended. I called a special meeting with my core staff to explain the situation. I need to tell you about a particular reservation, I began, addressing the small circle of employees who had been with me since the beginning. My family will be dining here for Thanksgiving. Diego, my executive chef and close friend, raised his eyebrows. The same family that didn't invite you to Thanksgiving? They're coming here? They don't know I own Harvest Table, I explained. My mother made the reservation without making the connection. The staff exchanged glances, a mix of disbelief and indignation on my behalf. We were tight-knit, and over the years, they'd heard enough about my family's situation to understand the significance. Diego crossed his arms. So what's the plan? Special menu? Extra spicy for Mom? A mischievous grin spread across his face. No, I said firmly. We're going to treat them exactly like any other guests. Perfect service, our best food. No pranks, no sabotage. But they deserve it, protested Lily, our pastry chef who had become like a sister to me. Maybe, I acknowledged. But that's not who we are. That's not who I am. I paused, considering my next words carefully. However, I am planning to personally serve them and reveal myself at some point during the meal. I just haven't decided exactly when or how. The staff nodded, respecting my decision while clearly hoping for some dramatic justice. Diego pulled me aside after the meeting. Whatever you decide, we've got your back, he said. But don't let them hurt you again. You've built something amazing here, with people who actually appreciate you. Remember that. Over the next few days, I found myself obsessing over the Thanksgiving menu. I decided to include dishes that carried personal significance, recipes that connected to family memories, both good and bad. The appetizer would be a refined version of the garlic bread my mother had criticized when I was 12. The soup, my father's favorite butternut squash recipe, elevated with brown butter and sage. For the main course, turkey prepared with my grandmother's secret brine, a recipe Mom had always tried and failed to replicate. Each dish was a piece of my history, a chapter of my journey. Preparing this menu felt like assembling a culinary autobiography that my family would consume without realizing they were tasting my story. The night before Thanksgiving, I stayed late at the restaurant, personally inspecting the private dining room where my family would sit. I adjusted the lighting, rearranged the centerpiece, polished already gleaming silverware. Everything had to be flawless. Standing alone in that empty dining room, I was suddenly transported back to childhood Thanksgivings. Mom orchestrating elaborate meals where appearance mattered more than taste or enjoyment. Dad carving the turkey with exaggerated ceremony. James and Natalie playing their assigned roles to perfection. And me, usually in trouble for some minor infraction, using the wrong fork, spilling a drop of gravy, asking an inappropriate question. I sank into one of the dining chairs, overcome by a wave of emotion. What was I trying to prove with this elaborate reveal? That I had succeeded despite Mom's lack of support? That I didn't need her approval? If that were truly the case, why did her exclusion still hurt so much? For a moment, I considered calling the whole thing off, asking Mike to contact them with some excuse about a plumbing emergency, forcing them to change venues. I could avoid the confrontation entirely. But as quickly as the thought came, I dismissed it. This wasn't just about petty revenge. It was about finally being seen by my family, truly seen for who I was and what I had accomplished. It was about standing in my truth after years of being diminished. Thanksgiving morning arrived crisp and clear. I was at the restaurant by 6 a.m., earlier than necessary, driven by nervous energy. The kitchen soon filled with staff, all executing their roles with practiced precision. The atmosphere was charged with the focused chaos that precedes service at a fine restaurant. Around noon, as preparations reached their peak, I experienced a sudden anxiety attack. Ducking into the walk-in refrigerator for privacy, I struggled to catch my breath, my heart racing painfully. The magnitude of the coming confrontation hit me all at once. Samantha found me there, sitting on an upturned milk crate among boxes of produce. "Pre-service jitters, or family drama?" she asked, sliding down to sit beside me. "Both," I admitted. "What if this is a terrible mistake? What if I'm just stooping to her level with this whole reveal plan?" Samantha considered this. "Maybe ask yourself what you want out of this. Revenge? Recognition? Reconciliation? Be clear about your intention before you walk into that dining room." Her words struck home. What did I want? Not to humiliate my mother, despite what she might deserve. Not to create a scene that would disrupt other diners' experiences. What I wanted, I realized, was acknowledgement. After years of having my passion and career dismissed as trivial, I wanted my family, especially my mother, to see what I had built. "I want them to see me," I said simply. "Really see me?" Samantha nodded. "Then make sure that's what happens. Stand in your power, Autumn. You've earned it." With renewed clarity, I returned to the kitchen. As service began and the restaurant filled with diners, I positioned myself where I could observe without being obvious. My family's reservation wasn't until 4 p.m., but I found myself checking the entrance every few minutes, anticipation building with each passing hour. At precisely 3:55 p.m., they arrived. Through the kitchen door window, I watched as the host greeted them and led them to the private dining room. My mother walked in first, impeccably dressed as always, surveying the restaurant with her critical eye. Dad followed, looking friendlier than I remembered but smiling warmly at the staff. James and his wife, Natalie, and her boyfriend, all dressed for the occasion, all oblivious to whose domain they had entered. I felt a hand on my shoulder, Diego, giving me a supportive squeeze. "Showtime, boss," he said softly. "Ready or not?" From my vantage point in the kitchen, I watched through the service window as my family settled into the private dining room. Mom immediately rearranged the centerpiece, moving it precisely 2 inches to the left, classic Claire Wilson behavior. Dad sat heavily in his chair, looking around with genuine appreciation at the warm, rustic elegance of the space. James checked his phone while his wife Lisa made polite conversation with Natalie's boyfriend Tyler, who appeared nervous in the formal setting. Mia, one of our most experienced servers, approached their table with professional grace. "Good afternoon and happy Thanksgiving. Welcome to Harvest Table. My name is Mia, and I'll be taking care of you today." Mom barely looked up from adjusting her napkin. "We've heard good things. I hope they're accurate." I winced at her tone, the same one she'd used with service staff my entire life, slightly condescending with an edge of preemptive disappointment. Mia, to her credit, maintained her warm smile. "I believe you'll find they are. Our chef has prepared a special Thanksgiving menu that honors tradition while incorporating our farm-to-table philosophy." "Farm-to-table," Mom repeated with a hint of skepticism. "Rather trendy, isn't it?" Dad intervened. "It sounds wonderful. We're excited to try everything." I had instructed Mia to follow the standard service protocol, no special treatment, but no subtle sabotage either. This family would receive the same exceptional experience as any other guests. When she returned to the kitchen, Mia caught my eye. Your mother is exactly as you described her. I managed a tight smile. Wait until she tastes the food and has to admit it's good. Diego had already begun preparing their first course, the elevated garlic bread I'd first attempted at 12, now transformed into delicate rosemary garlic focaccia with whipped herb butter. We'd paired it with a butternut squash soup garnished with crispy sage and brown butter, Dad's favorite. Sending out the Wilson family appetizers, Diego announced, placing the beautifully plated dishes on the pass. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry as I watched Mia carry them to the table. Through the window, I observed their reactions. Dad took a spoonful of soup and closed his eyes in appreciation. Natalie's boyfriend commented enthusiastically on the focaccia. But it was Mom's reaction I was waiting for, the woman who had dismissed my cooking since childhood. She took a small, careful taste of the soup, then another. A look of surprise crossed her face before she composed herself. She tried the focaccia next, and I saw something I'd rarely witnessed, Claire Wilson genuinely impressed by food. This is exceptional, I heard her tell Mia when she checked on the table. Compliments to the chef. The flavors are familiar somehow, but elevated. Familiar. Of course they were familiar. They were the flavors of her own kitchen, reimagined by the daughter whose culinary talents she had dismissed for 2 decades. The main course went out next, heritage turkey brined in my grandmother's secret recipe, served with chestnut stuffing, maple-glazed root vegetables, and cranberry-orange compote. Each component reflected some element of our family Thanksgivings, refined through my professional training and personal style. From the kitchen, I continued to observe as my family ate, their conversation flowing more easily as the meal progressed. I caught fragments, James talking about his recent promotion, Natalie mentioning a possible career change, Dad reminiscing about Thanksgivings past. Then I heard my name. It's too bad Autumn couldn't join us, Dad said, his voice carrying just enough for me to catch it. She always loved Thanksgiving. Mom took a sip of wine. She's always too busy with that little restaurant of hers. You know how she is, work comes first. Still, Dad persisted, we should have tried harder to include her. Mom waved her hand dismissively. I'm sure she's perfectly happy serving holiday meals to strangers rather than spending time with family. The irony of her statement hit me like a physical blow. Here she was, eating my food, sitting in my restaurant, completely unaware that the strangers I was serving included her. I'd like to compliment the chef personally, Mom told Mia during the main course. The turkey is prepared exactly how my mother used to make it, a family recipe I thought no one could replicate. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the cue I needed. I took a deep breath, removed my chef's coat to reveal a simple but elegant blouse underneath, and nodded to Diego. You've got this, he said. Remember, you've already won. Whatever happens next, you built something amazing here. With those words bolstering me, I pushed through the kitchen doors and made my way to the private dining room. I paused in the doorway, taking in the scene one last time before I changed it forever, my family enjoying my food, in my restaurant, unaware of the connection. Then I stepped forward. I understand someone wanted to compliment the chef? I said, my voice remarkably steady despite my pounding heart. 6 heads turned toward me. 6 expressions transformed in sequence from polite interest to shock as recognition dawned. Mom's face went through the most dramatic transformation, from pleasant anticipation to confusion to horrified realization. Her wineglass froze halfway to her lips. Autumn? Dad was the first to speak, his face lighting up with genuine delight. What are you doing here? I work here, Dad, I said, smiling at him while keeping Mom in my peripheral vision. She had set down her glass, her hand visibly trembling. You're a chef here? Natalie asked, confusion evident in her voice. I allowed myself a small smile. Not exactly. Mom found her voice at last. This is my restaurant, I finished for her. Harvest Table. I own it. I'm the executive chef and co-founder. I gestured around the room. All of this, the design, the menu, the concept, it's mine. Has been for 6 years now. James let out a low whistle. This place is yours? It's one of the most talked about restaurants in Boston. Why didn't you ever tell us? I met his gaze steadily. Would anyone have listened if I had? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Dad looked between Mom and me, distress evident on his face. Mom suddenly seemed to recover her composure, switching tactics with alarming speed. Autumn. What a wonderful surprise, she exclaimed with forced brightness. This was meant to be a surprise for you, of course. We wanted to support your business for Thanksgiving. The blatant lie hung in the air between us. No one at the table looked convinced, not even Mom herself. Really? I said, keeping my voice neutral. So the fact that no one invited me to Thanksgiving was part of the surprise? There must have been a misunderstanding, Mom insisted, looking to the others for support. Natalie was supposed to invite you to join us here. Natalie's face flushed. Mom, that's not. Stop, I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. Let's not do this. We all know I wasn't invited. We all know you had no idea this was my restaurant when you made the reservation. Mom's facade cracked slightly, uncertainty flickering across her face. I've spent years trying to earn your approval, your acknowledgement, I continued. Years of having my passion dismissed as a hobby, my career treated as an embarrassment. And now here you are, eating my food, sitting in my restaurant, about to compliment the chef on recipes that came from our family. Recipes I've refined and elevated through years of hard work and training. I hadn't planned a speech, but the words poured out, years of suppressed feelings finding their voice at last. The soup you just praised? It's the same recipe Dad taught me when I was 10, the one you said was adequate at best when I made it for his birthday. The turkey is brined exactly the way Grandma taught me, the technique you could never quite master but wouldn't let me help with at family dinners. Mom's expression hardened. Is this why you orchestrated this? To embarrass me in front of the family? To make some point? I didn't orchestrate anything, I replied calmly. You chose this restaurant. You made the reservation. You excluded me from Thanksgiving. All I did was show up for work. The tension at the table was palpable. James shifted uncomfortably while his wife Lisa studied her plate. Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear. Natalie seemed on the verge of tears. Then something unexpected happened. She's right, Mom, James said quietly. We all know Autumn wasn't invited. We all knew it wasn't right, and none of us had the courage to stand up to you about it. Mom turned to him, betrayal written across her face. James? No, he's right, Natalie joined in, her voice trembling. I knew it was wrong. I should have insisted we include you, Autumn. I'm so sorry. Mom looked between her children, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling before her eyes. I don't appreciate being ganged up on during a family holiday. Autumn, you're causing a scene in your own establishment. Is that professional? It was a desperate attempt to regain control, to shift blame, to make me the villain in this story. A year ago, even a month ago, it might have worked. I might have backed down, apologized, retreated to the kitchen to lick my wounds. But not today. This isn't about professionalism, Mom. It's about family. It's about years of being treated as less than because I chose a path you didn't approve of. It's about showing up for Thanksgiving dinner and finding out I wasn't even invited to my own family's celebration. My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed on. Do you have any idea how that feels? To be erased from your own family? For a moment, Claire Wilson, the woman who always had an answer, who never lost control, seemed at a loss for words. Her carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. I never meant to, she began, then stopped, uncharacteristically uncertain. Dad reached across the table and took her hand. Claire, he said gently, it's time to be honest. With Autumn and with yourself. The private dining room fell silent, all eyes on my mother as she sat frozen, caught between defensiveness and a truth she'd avoided for years. Mom's composure crumbled completely, something I'd witnessed perhaps twice in my entire life. Her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass, avoiding everyone's eyes. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I've only ever wanted what's best for all my children." "No," I said quietly. "You wanted what you thought was best. There's a difference." "How dare you?" Mom's defensive anger flared, her go-to response when cornered. "After everything I've sacrificed for this family, you sit in judgment of me? You, who abandoned us to pursue this hobby." The old accusation stung, but I held my ground. I didn't abandon anyone. I followed my passion, the only thing that ever made me feel truly alive. And it wasn't you who was abandoned, Mom. It was me. Excluded from family photos, from holidays, from the narrative you created about our perfect family. "That's not true," she protested, but her voice wavered. "Isn't it?" I challenged. "When was the last time you asked about my life? My work? When have you ever shown interest in what I built here? You never told me about this place. Would you have listened if I had? Or would you have dismissed it as that little restaurant thing like you always have?" Mom looked to Dad for support, but his expression remained gentle yet firm. "Claire," he said softly, "Autumn has a point. You too, Robert?" The betrayal in her voice was palpable. "It's time for honesty," Dad insisted. "We've walked on eggshells around this situation for too many years." The table fell silent again. I noticed servers hovering uncertainly near the door, sensing the tension but unsure whether to approach. I gave a small nod, indicating they should continue normal service but give our table space. James cleared his throat. "Mom, I've never said this before because it was easier not to. But the way you've treated Autumn over the years, it isn't right. She deserves the same support and recognition you've given me and Natalie." Mom stared at him, stunned by this defection from her golden child. "James is right," Natalie added, her voice stronger now. "Every time Autumn's name comes up, you change the subject. When she's at family gatherings, you barely acknowledge her. I've noticed it for years but never had the courage to say anything. So now I'm on trial?" Mom's voice rose defensively. "For not fawning over a career choice I didn't understand? For wanting more for my daughter than serving people?" The dismissive way she said serving people ignited something in me. "Is that what you think I do?" I asked, gesturing around the restaurant. "I don't just serve people, Mom. I create experiences. I lead a team of 30 talented professionals. I source ingredients from local farmers, supporting sustainable agriculture. I built a business that's not only profitable but respected in this community." I leaned forward, holding her gaze. "But even if all I did was serve people, what would be wrong with that? What makes that less valuable than James's corporate job or Natalie's marketing career?" For once, Mom had no ready answer. The silence stretched between us, filled with decades of misunderstanding and hurt. Then, unexpectedly, she began to cry. Not the performative tears she sometimes employed to end arguments, but genuine, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and long buried. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted through tears. "I don't know how to be proud of something I don't understand." The raw honesty of her statement caught me off guard. This vulnerable version of Claire Wilson was completely unfamiliar. "What don't you understand?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Any of it," she exclaimed. "This world you're in, it's foreign to me. I come from a generation where cooking was something women did out of obligation, not choice. Where success meant escaping the kitchen, not running back to it. Something clicked into place for me then, a perspective I'd never considered. For my mother, raised by a homemaker who had few options beyond domestic duties, my choice to enter the culinary world might have seemed like rejecting the freedoms she'd fought to give me. And then you were so good at it," she continued, wiping her eyes. "So passionate, so certain. It terrified me." "Why?" I asked, genuinely confused. Because you didn't need my guidance, she admitted. You had this inner compass that pointed you firmly in a direction I hadn't chosen for you. You were willing to defy me, to struggle, to build something on your own terms. She gestured helplessly. Do you know how threatening that is to a mother who's built her identity around being needed? Around being right? The confession hung in the air between us, breathtaking in its honesty. Oh, Mom, I said, feeling a complex mix of emotions, understanding, sadness, and lingering hurt all tangled together. Your father always said you were the strongest of all our children, she continued. The most like me, ironically. Too stubborn to be controlled. I didn't know how to parent a child who didn't need my approval, so I tried to force you to seek it. By withholding it, I said, the pieces finally fitting together. She nodded, looking ashamed. It's not a strategy I'm proud of. And then when it didn't work, when you succeeded anyway. She gestured around the restaurant. It became easier to pretend your success didn't exist than to admit I'd been wrong. Autumn, Dad interjected gently, your mother may not have shown it, but she's kept every newspaper article, every magazine mention of you or this restaurant. They're in a folder in her desk drawer. I turned to Mom in disbelief. You have? She nodded, looking embarrassed. I couldn't bring myself to tell you I was proud, but I couldn't help tracking your success either. Mom has Google alerts set up for your name and the restaurant, Natalie added quietly. You knew? I asked, stunned by this revelation. You knew about Harvest Table all this time? Not at first, Mom admitted. But for the past 3 years, yes. I've known. Then why make a reservation here? Why exclude me from Thanksgiving and then come to my restaurant? Mom's expression was complicated, embarrassment, shame, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Because I wanted to see it, she said finally. To experience what you've built without the pressure of being your mother, without everyone watching to see how I'd react. I thought I could come anonymously, see this place through objective eyes. And the verdict? I asked, my heart hammering. She gestured to the half-eaten meal before them. It's extraordinary. Everything. The food, the atmosphere, the service. It's exceptional, Autumn. Truly. She swallowed hard. I've been so wrong, for so long. I don't know if you can forgive that. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, my mother was seeing me, really seeing me, and acknowledging my worth on my own terms. I don't know either, I answered honestly. There's a lot of hurt to work through. Would you be willing to try? She asked, vulnerability evident in every line of her face. I can't promise I'll get everything right immediately, but I miss my daughter. Those 5 words, I miss my daughter, broke something open inside me. The anger and resentment I'd carried for so long didn't disappear, but they shifted, making room for something new, possibility. I think, I said carefully, that could start with me joining you for the rest of Thanksgiving dinner. If there's still room at the table. Dad immediately stood and pulled up another chair. There's always been room, honey. Always. As I sat down, joining my family for the first Thanksgiving meal we'd shared in years, I felt a tentative sense of hope. The conversation that followed wasn't perfect or easy, but it was real, more real than any interaction we'd had in decades. And when I personally served the dessert course, a modern take on my grandmother's apple pie, the look of genuine pride in my mother's eyes was sweeter than any professional accolade I'd ever received. A month passed after the Thanksgiving revelation, bringing with it the December chill and holiday decorations throughout Boston. Harvest Table was festooned with subtle evergreen garlands and twinkling lights, creating a warm haven from the winter outside. Business was booming with holiday parties and special events, keeping me busier than ever. Yet despite the professional demands on my time, I found myself thinking often about my family, about the unexpected turn our relationship had taken on Thanksgiving Day. The raw honesty of that conversation had left me feeling both exhausted and strangely lighter, as if a burden I'd carried for years had begun to shift. I was at my desk reviewing supplier contracts when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Mom's name flashed on the screen, still a rare enough occurrence to give me pause. We'd texted a few times since Thanksgiving, cautious exchanges that carefully avoided any topics that might reopen wounds. But this was her first call. "Hello?" I answered, unable to keep a note of wariness from my voice. "Autumn," Mom said, sounding uncharacteristically uncertain. "I hope I'm not disturbing you at work." "No, it's fine. Just paperwork." "Is everything okay?" "Yes, everything's fine." She paused. "Actually, I was wondering if you might be willing to help me with something." I tensed, years of conditioning making me anticipate some kind of trap or criticism. "What kind of help?" "Cooking advice," she said, the words clearly difficult for her to say. "I'm hosting Christmas dinner and I want to try some new recipes. More contemporary ones." I thought, who better to ask than my daughter the chef? The simple acknowledgement of my expertise, something she'd never done before, felt monumental. "What kind of recipes are you thinking of?" I asked, still cautious but warming to the idea. "That's just it, I don't know what's good. Everything I make is so traditional. I thought maybe you could show me a few techniques. If you have time, of course. I know how busy you must be." I considered her request. A cooking lesson with my mother seemed both promising and potentially disastrous, putting us together in the very arena where our conflicts had begun. "I could come over one evening this week," I offered, surprising myself with the suggestion. "We could cook something together." The relief in her voice was palpable. "That would be wonderful. Would Thursday work? Around 6? We made arrangements, and after hanging up, I sat at my desk, marveling at this small but significant step. My mother, asking for my culinary advice. The world had indeed turned upside down. Thursday evening found me on the doorstep of my childhood home, a bag of groceries in hand and a mixture of hope and trepidation in my heart. Mom answered the door immediately, as if she'd been waiting nearby. "Autumn," she greeted me with an awkward half-hug. "Thank you for coming." The house looked the same as it always had, immaculate, tastefully decorated, everything in its proper place. Yet something felt different. Perhaps it was just my perception that had changed. We made our way to the kitchen, her domain for decades, a place where I'd often felt like an intruder rather than a welcome participant. Today, though, she gestured for me to set my groceries on the counter with surprising deference. "So, what are we making?" she asked, washing her hands at the sink. "I thought we'd start with something simple but impressive, a roasted rack of lamb with a herb crust, accompanied by root vegetables glazed with pomegranate molasses." Mom looked both intimidated and intrigued. "That sounds complicated." "It's really not," I assured her. "Cooking is mostly about understanding a few basic principles and then applying them creatively. Here, let me show you." What followed was one of the most surreal experiences of my adult life. Teaching my mother cooking techniques in her own kitchen. To my surprise, she proved to be an attentive student, asking thoughtful questions and following my guidance without attempting to assert control over the process. As we worked side by side, trimming the lamb and preparing the herb crust, a strange thing happened. The kitchen, once a battleground, became neutral territory where we could interact without the weight of our history pressing down quite so heavily. "You make it look so easy," Mom commented as I demonstrated how to French the rack of lamb with quick, confident movements. "It's just practice," I replied. "Thousands of hours of repetition." "I never realized how technical cooking could be," she admitted. "The precision, the timing, the chemistry of it all. I always thought of it as just following recipes." "It can be both scientific and artistic," I explained, warming to my favorite subject. "You need to understand the rules to know when you can break them creatively." As the lamb roasted, filling the kitchen with mouth-watering aromas, Mom poured us each a glass of wine. We sat at the kitchen island, the pause in activity creating a moment of potential awkwardness. I've been thinking a lot about Thanksgiving, Mom said after a moment, studying her wine glass. About what you said. What we all said. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. I want you to know I've been seeing a therapist, she confessed, the admission clearly difficult for a woman who had always prided herself on self-sufficiency. Just a few sessions so far, but it's helping me understand some things about myself. About why I treated you the way I did. Such as? I prompted gently. She took a deep breath. Did you know my mother wanted to be a chef? Before she met my father? I shook my head, surprised. Grandma Wilson had been a traditional homemaker as long as I'd known her. She had dreams of attending culinary school in Paris. Had been saving for years. Then she met my father, got married, had me and my sisters. Mom swirled her wine thoughtfully. She never talked about it much, but sometimes I'd catch her watching Julia Child on television with this look of longing. I had no idea, I said softly. She channeled all her frustrated ambitions into making me perfect, Mom continued. Perfect grades, perfect appearance, perfect future. The path she couldn't take became the path I had to take. She looked up at me with sudden clarity. And then I did the same to you. The parallel was startling, 3 generations of women, each shaped by the dreams and disappointments of the one before. When you chose culinary school, Mom continued, it felt like you were choosing her dream over my plan for you. Like you were rejecting everything I'd worked for. It felt personal. It wasn't, I said. I was just following my own path. I know that now, she nodded. But I couldn't see it then. And after I'd dug in my heels, after I'd made such a stand against your choice, admitting I was wrong became harder with each passing year. The timer dinged, interrupting this moment of revelation. We returned to the task of finishing our meal, but something had shifted between us, a new understanding that didn't erase the past but provided context for it. Over dinner, which turned out beautifully, we continued talking, not just about our complicated history but about our present lives. Mom asked detailed questions about Harvest Table, showing genuine interest in the business aspects as well as the culinary ones. I found myself enthusiastically explaining our farm partnership program and plans for expansion. You know, she said thoughtfully, you've inherited the Wilson business sense after all. Just applied it differently than I expected. It was the closest thing to a compliment about my career she'd ever offered, and I found myself unexpectedly moved by it. Thanks, Mom, I said. That means a lot coming from you. As I prepared to leave that evening, Mom handed me a gift bag. I was going to save this for Christmas, but I think now is better, she said. Inside was a framed copy of Diane Mitchell's first review of Harvest Table, the one that had helped put my restaurant on the map. It was professionally mounted and framed, clearly done with care and at some expense. How did you get this? I asked, genuinely touched. I ordered a back issue of the magazine the day after it was published, she admitted. I've had it for years. The thought of my mother secretly preserving evidence of my success while publicly dismissing it was both painful and poignant, a perfect encapsulation of our complicated relationship. Thank you, I said simply, hugging her with more warmth than I had in years. The weeks that followed brought more small steps toward healing. Mom made her first official visit to Harvest Table as my mother rather than an anonymous diner. I introduced her to my staff, showed her the kitchen, explained our philosophy. She still asked pointed questions and made a few reflexively critical comments, but there was a new undercurrent of respect in her interactions with me. James and Natalie, too, seemed liberated by the breaking of our family's silent compact. Natalie called more frequently, sharing details of her life and asking genuine questions about mine. James invited me to his company's holiday party, proudly introducing me as my sister, the restaurateur to his colleagues. Dad, for his part, seemed relieved beyond measure. I've waited 20 years to see my family whole again, he told me over coffee one morning, his eyes suspiciously bright. By Christmas, we had progressed enough that my mother suggested holding the holiday dinner at Harvest Table. A proposal that would have been unthinkable just months before. Are you sure? I asked. I know how much you enjoy hosting at home. I think it's time we created some new traditions, she said firmly. Besides, I can hardly compete with a professional kitchen. And so Christmas dinner found us all gathered around the largest table in Harvest Table's private dining room, my blood family and my chosen restaurant family together for the first time. Diego had outdone himself with the menu, incorporating elements of traditional Wilson family dishes while adding his own creative touches. Mom, to everyone's surprise, had brought homemade cookies for the staff, using a recipe I'd shared during our cooking lesson. The gesture was small but significant, an acknowledgement of this other family I'd built, and her willingness to be part of it rather than in competition with it. As we finished our meal, Mom clinked her glass, signaling for attention. I'd like to propose a toast, she said, rising to her feet. To Autumn, who has created not just extraordinary food but this extraordinary place where people connect and celebrate together. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what you've built, but I am so very proud to be your mother. Her voice broke on the last words, and for a moment, neither of us could speak. Then I stood and embraced her, both of us teary-eyed. And to family, I added when I found my voice again. Both the ones we're born to and the ones we choose along the way. Later that evening, as guests departed and staff began cleaning up, I found a quiet moment alone in the restaurant that had become my home. The twinkling lights reflected in the windows, creating the illusion of stars scattered throughout the space. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the struggles, the triumphs, and now this unexpected healing. The exclusion that had wounded me so deeply on Thanksgiving had ultimately led to inclusion of a more meaningful kind. My mother's snub had forced a confrontation we'd all avoided for too long, lancing a festering wound and allowing real healing to begin. We were still learning how to be family to one another, still stumbling occasionally over old patterns and tender spots. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged in both worlds, the family I was born to and the one I had created. Sometimes, I reflected, being left out is the first step to finding where you truly belong. What about you? Have you ever experienced a painful exclusion that ultimately led to something positive? Share your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that family healing is possible, even after years of hurt. Thank you for joining me for this chapter of my story, and I wish you all peace and healing in your own family journeys.